This is False Start, a college football podcast for everyone and everyone else. I'm your host, John Buhler, lead writer for FanSided. As you can see, I am flying solo like a cup once again with Cody Williams, content director, fansided.com, feeling a bit under the weather after getting back from covering the Super Bowl. This is being recorded right before the Super Bowl, but Radio Row and all that stuff that went on there at San Jose and Santa Clara. But he should be back on the program for our episode later this week. Fully in the offseason, no more football. So that's really exciting here. But I don't want to dilly-dally any more time. Let's get rolling here with our first and 15 today, which is a slice of pumpkin pie. Fernando Mendoza will not be throwing at the NFL Combine. I wrote about this for Who's Your State of Mind on Saturday. It was working yesterday. And he was even on the Pat McAfee show again, in state. He's from Indianapolis and everything like that. And he said, he has really no interest in throwing at the combine because, he brought up a couple of really good points. He said, like, look, I would rather be throwing with his guys than people he doesn't know. This is about him making sure that his NFL draft stock stays as high and as unblemished as it can be. If you go and you throw to players at the combine you don't know, there's a chance that somebody may dock you. Look, the Las Vegas Raiders are desperate and they need to draft a quarterback above all else. But to be totally honest with you, like they're a screwy organization. So I can understand like maybe how that maybe moves them off his scent potentially. But I think he also said Mendoza also said that he wants to help elevate his guys. And look, Indiana may have gone 16-0 and won the national championship, but Mendoza is the only first round player off this team. And he's only that because of this past season he had. Like he would have been like what a third or fourth round pick coming into this year. But look, that happens in college football. Joe Burrow was like a fifth or sixth round pick, and then he went number one overall to the Bengals in 2020 after the 2019 season. Cam Newton, same sort of thing. It is what it is. When you win a national championship and you win a Heisman and you play quarterback, you're going to go number one overall. But he really wants to make it a point to elevate the stock of both Elijah Surratt and Omar Cooper Jr. And I think both of these guys are right now firmly day two picks, probably going to go into the middle to late second round. I've seen some mocks where like Cooper can go in the middle of the second round to the Steelers, and then maybe Surratt goes late to the Patriots in the second round. I think it's interesting that of those two, Surratt is probably the most well-known receiver that Indiana has, but maybe he's kind of a close to a finished product here, if you will. Whereas I think Cooper has a little bit more room to grow. He didn't transfer in, from another school. He kind of has been Indiana the entire time. And obviously, he made some huge plays down the stretch to help Indiana have its perfect season. So, yeah, again, I'm totally in favor of the idea of Mendoza not throwing at the combine. Like, he'll go, he'll interview, he'll get his measurables, and then he'll just light up at his pro day. And he'll start looking for a place to live in Southern Nevada to be the next quarterback of the Las Vegas Raiders. I think, in recent years, you rarely see quarterbacks throw at the combine. I think you really only do that when, like, the only guy that I could think of at the top of my mind who threw was Blake Bortles, and he was the first quarterback taken in 14, third overall to the Jaguars. But he played at UCF, and at the time, UCF was a power, or was not a power four team. It was group of six now, I guess. I got to start remembering to use that terminology moving forward. But like this is an opportunity for him to prove, like, okay, I wasn't just carving up players in a lesser schedule. Like, I can really throw with dudes. And obviously, Bortles had the physical gifts, but he obviously had some mechanical issues and played for the Jaguars, and that's what happened with him. He had some moments of success there, 15, 17, what have you, but that is kind of what it is. But yeah, I think this is absolutely the right call there for Mendoza. Like, what's the point? There's nothing to gain by throwing at the combine. And look, I know it's kind of like a slow college football news cycle here, but Mendoza's going to be the driving force here for the upcoming NFL draft. And I think more importantly, this is a tone setter for him moving forward and through the draft process. I think having a good guy coming in the league and going to a franchise that needs a marquee stand-up individual, and then that's not to discredit anybody on the Raiders, but like having just pure positivity being injected into that organization is tremendous. So again, I think this is absolutely the right call for him to not throw the combine, but I do think he is going about it a little bit differently than what I would have thought. And I think it just kind of shows that, his mental makeup and his leadership is just it's just different. I don't know how well his skill set's going to translate into the NFL physically, but I think he's certainly a cut above the shoulders. So I think he's the Raiders are going to be getting a very good one here for sure. And I'm gonna keep rolling here with our second topic of the day. I'm gonna have another slice of pumpkin humble pie. Yeah. I don't really understand why people are not coming around to the idea that Miami Hurricanes edge rusher Akheem Mesidor is not going to be a first round pick. Look, I understand that he's going to be turning 25 here soon. I understand that he was a complimentary pass rusher to Ruben Bain Jr. at Miami. I realize he's older, but the guy's hella productive. And I think when you have a player like that who knows his role, it's going to work out for him. Look, I think any sort of NFL mock draft stuff I've seen in recent weeks, he's been a climber. I think prior to like November or October, he was like a top 100 pick, then like top 75. Now he's kind of in that 32 range. And I think at this point with Miami, you're looking at Bain and offensive tackle Francis Mauigoa like being like top 12 locks. Probably going to go in around the top five, to be totally honest with you, because Mendoza is going to be the only quarterback going incredibly high. I've seen some stuff where Ty Simpson doesn't even go in the first round. That's kind of what we're working with here, and that's why Mendoza can kind of do what he wants. He's in total control here. He's the number one quarterback prospect. It's not particularly close. It would have been different if Dante Moore would have entered the draft, but he's going back to college. And I'll touch on Oregon later on with the show. But here's really the big thing with Mesidor. People are like, oh, he's older. Oh, he's not the featured edge rusher. I think he knows his role. And I think when you have a player that knows who he is and what he's about, that can translate pretty quickly to the NFL because you're not trying to be something you're not. So I've seen Mesidor potentially coming off the board as high as the 15 to the Buccaneers, maybe the Lions at 17. But if he were to kind of go, in the second half of the first round, again, we're looking at a guy that if he goes to like the Houston Texans at 28 or 49ers at 27, somebody like that, you're going to be going to a team that kind of already has some defensive pieces there. You're not coming in there expecting to be like the culture of change, which is what I think Bain and Mauigoa are going to be doing, as blue chip prospects. Like whoever drafts Bain's like, we don't have a pass rush. Our team stinks. We need this guy to come in here and get 10 sacks right away. Whereas, Mauigoa, it's like, we can't block anything. We need a guy who can come in here and be the best left tackle in a very weak offensive tackle class. But with Mesidor, I mean, look, I think there's value taking him uh, in the second round too. I think it was like with the Cowboys taking Donovan Ezeruku out of Boston College. Again, I feel like he's kind of Mesidor's kind of checking those early boxes throughout the draft process for me, where I'm like, I just love the guy, and I think it's going to work there at the next level. Look, maybe the medicals will come back weak. Maybe he doesn't interview well. I don't know. There's a myriad of reasons why Mesidor's draft stock could slip, but I'll be straight with you in this. I think this is very, very, very important. He's not going to be drafted to be someone's number one edge rusher because he's going to be going to a team in all likelihood that already has one. Again, if you're coming off the board in the second half of the first round, you're going to a playoff team in all likelihood. And in that situation, like they're going to have players on defense because you can't be a completely one-sided team bereft of talent defensively and make the playoffs. That's not how the NFL works. That's not really how football works. You got to be able to do at least both sides of the ball decently. I will say though, I have seen enough teams make the playoffs who don't do much on offense, but are so stout defensively that maybe that can overcome it. It's like, I mean, we talk about with the '02 Buccaneers, the 2000 Ravens, 17 Jaguars, a handful of other teams. So maybe this Texans team had some offensive issues as well. But Look, the more I sit here and I think about it when it comes to Akheem Mesidor, this is a guy that I think will go in. Look, he knows he doesn't have youth on his side. He knows that he's not going to be a number one guy. This is a guy who transferred over to Miami from West Virginia. He knows he's got to be productive right away because, you know, he may not have a third contract in his career. He may only play in the NFL for 7, 8, 10 years. At that point, you got to get it and you got to be productive. And I also kind of think that's the other thing too. If there's a player that you think can be impactful for the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and you think you can get him in the first round, do it because you have the opportunity at the fifth year option. Whereas a second year player, you don't have that. So again, you're delaying having to pay a guy massive money on a second contract by this additional year. Yeah, maybe for the money it may not be worth it. Maybe there's a considerable drop off in prospects, from like your top 12 down to guys from 13 to 48 or something like that. That's kind of how NFL drafts have worked in recent years. But I just look at Mesidor and I think that he's going to be able to go into a good team and make something happen. Again, I could be wrong in this. I'm not a general manager. This isn't what I do. I'm just an opinionist who writes about college football. This is false start, but I think that what he can provide an NFL team makes sense at him coming off the board in the latter part of the first round. I think the maybe not necessarily the upside, but most certainly the concept of production being there. All right, let's move on to our third topic here with some Big Ten energy. It's looking like Maryland is going to try to hire disgraced former Tennessee head coach Jeremy Pruitt as an assistant. And again, this is all fluid and maybe things will change here. But look, Jeremy Pruitt, I think it's funny. He's going to the Big Ten. He's the most SEC guy ever, like the thickest Alabama accent you'll ever hear. Guy didn't know what asparagus was, being on two-a-days, playing for Coach Probst at Hoover High back in two decades ago or whatever it was. And anyway, I think what's really important with him is look, Pruitt was a okay. We got Miss Izzy in the background barking because somebody's outside. That's kind of what's going on right now. She doesn't. I started talking about Jerry Pruitt. She just starts barking. This is just she didn't want me to go in the basement either. Anyway, when it comes to Jeremy Pruitt, he had that show cause to Tennessee. Again, they kind of threw the book at him, so to speak. They made him eat it for improper recruitments. And for those who don't understand what a show cause is and what it means, basically, you have to prove to somebody that this guy needs to be on your staff amid like, allegations, legal stuff, and things of that nature. Again, I'm not the biggest person on like legally. It's like you have to be prove beyond a shadow of a doubt why this guy has to work for you. And a lot of times it's just too much red tape. It's too complicated to actually make that work. So a lot of times they don't do it. This is a way to punish people in college football. Like it's a probation thing for coaches in some ways. We've seen Chip Kelly have one. We've seen Jim Harbaugh's got one. And I think what Pruitt's last year coaching at Tennessee was in 2020. So we're coming up on year six. I think he's still got about another year or two left of his show cause. Maybe he's done some stuff with Charles Kelly there at Jacksonville State. I know he worked on the 2021 New York Giants staff. Like Joe Judge might have been the head coach at that point. But I think what's important to understand here is, look, Maryland's got to figure this out. And I understand that Mike Locksley and Jerry Pruitt have that Alabama connection. They're both Nick Saban disciples. They were on some of those staffs there in the late 2010s and everything like that. I think it's interesting that, James Smith, the new AD of Maryland, coming over from the Atlanta Braves organization, he's allowing this to go. And look, I think there's a lore and there's intrigue with Maryland because you have Malik Washington at quarterback. The guy's incredibly talented. And we know that Mike Locksley knows how to coach up offense, but hashtag turtle up. And I think when it comes to Maryland, like they just don't play enough defense. This isn't something that Locksley particularly cares about, which I think is interesting because he's a Saban disciple and that's defense is everything. But outside of Kirby Smart, like Jerry Pruitt's one of the best defensive minds to ever serve under Saban. I think that if he has an opportunity to go and be an assistant, and I think he's going to be a defensive coordinator there for Maryland, but like if he's on the staff, that could help. And look, I think is an anonymous enough power for a job where, you know, this isn't like Michigan hiring him. This isn't like Indiana hiring him now, or this isn't even Wisconsin. Like you're kind of talking about like the 18 teams in the Big Ten. Like how often do we talk about Maryland on this show? And a little bit because we touch on everybody, but like I would say if there's six teams in the Big Ten we talk about at least, Maryland's certainly one of them. Um, but this is a huge year for Mike Locksley. Like he's got to win. The last couple of years have not been good. If you can't make the playoff, not playoff, if you can't get to a bowl game with Malik Washington's second year there in College Park, like are you ever going to do it? And then it's you're basically being, another year removed from Talia Tagovailoa. You had Billy Edwards Jr. that one year. You had Washington last year. Maybe Tagovailoa was kind of the guy that was like elevating Maryland beyond what they were because really without him, what have the Terps been under Locksley? They've been a sub 500 team. Um, Look, I'll say this, like Pruitt's done his time, so to speak, and I think, and I'll touch on this probably more with Blog and Dirty with the James Pierce Jr. situation because, of course, my godforsaken NFL team has stuff like this. But like growing up with the Michael Vick stuff, anytime there's like a coach where they have some really bad stuff, maybe not like that awful with Pruitt, but like if you want to work and you want to do this, like you can't say like one mistake or a series of mistakes should like prevent you from ever having a job again. Like this is America. This is an opportunity. This is a land of second chances, and there's some people that have way more than that. But look, when Pruitt is calling a defense, and I saw this at Georgia at the tail end of Mark Richt, I saw this at Florida State, I saw this at Alabama. When he's calling a defense, he's really good, and I think that that could be tremendous for Maryland because Maryland is the flagship school for Under Armour. I mean, Kevin Plank went there, and I've always like, there's a ton of talent there in the DMV area. If they could just figure their stuff out, Maryland could be, as good as it was with when Ralph Regent was there or Bobby Ross, things of that nature. But like they've kind of lost an identity since going to the Big Ten. This hire potentially by Maryland, including Pruitt, could be a galvanizing force to get the Terps. How we view Minnesota in a way. We're like they're kind of overachieving a little bit. I think PJ Fleck is a fantastic head coach, but like you're this could help kind of offset maybe some of Loxley's coaching inefficiencies because I think Maryland is more talent laden than Minnesota. They have more resources. They should be better. And I think having a guy whose stock is like coming up from an all-time low and Pruitt, if you can bring him in, like I don't hate that. I think you just got to be smart about these sort of things. And we'll see what Maryland ultimately decides to do. But all I know is Loxley's got to get this team to a bowl game because if they don't, it's going to be problematic there for the Terps. All right, that ain't bad. Let's move on to the second half of our show with playoffs. Are you kidding me? This is kind of where my head was at yesterday while I've been working the last couple of days. Been writing some articles, with playoff national championship odds. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set the stage here with my way too early college football offseason tiers. So I basically looked at every team that has roughly plus 10,000 or better odds to win the national championship next year and a couple of group of six teams. So I put teams that I think, could make the playoff next year in one of five buckets. I've got likely returnees, newcomer locks, Power Four contenders, Power Four pretenders, and group of six contenders. So I'll work my way through and kind of explain these. This is probably where I'm going to spend the bulk of the show here, but I think it's gonna be fun. So likely returnees. I believe there are six teams that made the playoff this past year that are poised to make it back this year. In alphabetical order, that would be Georgia, Indiana, Miami, Ohio State, Oregon, and Texas Tech. Now, Georgia, Indiana, Ohio State, and Oregon have each made it the two previous playoffs in the 12-team format. Look, the only four made it this past year. If we would look back at a few previous shows, of teams that I were locks to make the playoff, like I was like Clemson's a lock, Penn State's a lock, Notre Dame's a lock, and Texas is a lock, and none of them made it. I thought I was really high in Arizona State. They were good. They weren't as good. And again, a lot can change between now and the end of August when we start doing this for real. But I look at those six teams. And I think that this is my logic. This is how I kind of go about building a college football playoff field. And again, I did one on the previous show in response to kind of what Brad Crawford is doing or did for 200 for CBS Sports. So you can definitely check that out. I wish I could remember off the top of my head. I could probably pull it up at some point, but whatever it is. But so as I'm going through Georgia, Indiana, Ohio State, and Oregon, like they kind of know what it takes to be a top 10 team in the country year over year. There may be maybe one of them doesn't make it back, but I feel very strongly that all four could. And just to go a little bit further down, Georgia, you won the SEC the last 2 years. Gunnar Stockton's coming back for his second full season as a starter. The team a year ago was young. You lose a little bit to the NFL, but not a ton. You were able to retain both coordinators in Mike Bobo and Glenn Schumann, albeit coordinators who are very much under the gun. Your schedule is going to be much easier than it was a year ago. And I mean, I think Georgia's playing with a chip on his shoulder. I think that Georgia's like, not only do we have to make the playoff, we got to win a game. We got to contend for a national championship again. Kirby Smart's a smart guy. He'll figure this out. The game's changed a little bit, and we'll see what he does. I think having a little bit more of an NIL backing will help Georgia, and I think it's great. Indiana is the team that I think of these four who made it the last 2 years, I'm a little more apprehensive about. Excuse me. Um, anyway, when it comes to Indiana, I feel as though the Hoosiers, like Kurt Sagan's got this thing figured out. Look, I don't think they're going to repeat as national champions. I think replacing Fernando Mendoza with Josh Hoover, it'll be good. It won't be the same. I don't know if you could really galvanize everybody the same way you did a year ago, but you'll still win about 10 games. You're a new power in the Big Ten, so I struggle to see them not making it. And even if they don't, they'll be like 9-3. They'll be very close. Ohio State's a team I'm very high on. I think that, bringing in another former NFL head coach on your staff and Arthur Smith with Matt Patricia really helps elevate Ryan Day. Arthur Smith can actually call plays. I'm not really sure if Brian Hartline ever could. Julian Sands back for another year. You've got Jeremiah Smith at wide receiver. You do lose a lot defensively in the NFL, but you're also Ohio State. And I also kind of feel that like this is the best program in the country. This team has the highest floor of anybody in college football. If they miss the playoff, I'm not saying that Ryan Day should get fired, but like that's some people in Columbus would think that. And then obviously with Oregon, you getting Dante Moore back is huge. If they didn't, I'd be a little apprehensive about that with Dylan Raiola taking over and him being, coming off of an ACL tear. Dan Lanning's got Oregon recruiting at a phenomenal level, got them playing with a certain level of toughness that is unaccustomed to what this program usually is. Big Ten, they'll be able to get wins. They'll be able to get pelts in the wall. My concern is you do lose your two coordinators of note, with Will Stein taking over at Kentucky and then Tosh Lupoi taking over at his alma mater of Cal. And again, in time, I'll probably learn more about the coordinators' names who are replacing uh, Stein and Lupoi in Eugene. But look, they replaced Kenny Dillingham with Will Stein. That worked out wonderfully. You kind of knew Lupoi and Stein were on a head coaching trajectory as well. So I think Oregon's immensely talented. They may pull back a little bit in the coaching department, but the soft middle belly of the Big Ten, Oregon's just better than that. I think with Miami and Texas Tech, when I talk about these teams, like who else do you think is going to win their respective leagues? Look, I understand that Miami did not win the ACC a year ago, but they played a national championship. They get Darren Mensah and Cooper Barkate to come over from ACC champion Duke. They clean up in the portal. They recruit fantastically at high school. You're able to retain both Shannon Dawson and Corey Heatherman as your coordinators. Mario Cristobal is just the perfect coach for this team because he is one of the guys there in Miami. I know we give him a lot of credit for some of his in-game ops, but like very good in front of the podium, very good recruiter, just kind of the lifeblood for what they need to do, and they've got all the support they need. And then Texas Tech, drill baby drill. Cody Campbell's going to keep drilling. You're able to retain not only Joe McGuire's coaching chops are growing. You're able to retain Shield Wood for another year defensively. This is I think I'm trying to think who the offensive coordinator is. I think Mac Leftwich. You'll improve there because you'll be better at quarterback with Brendan Sorsby replacing Baron Morton. You're still recruiting phenomenally, in the portal, maybe a little bit better out of high school. And then you look at who else could be chasing them in the Big 12, whether that's BYU, Utah, Arizona State, what have you. I think Texas Tech's is strong and powerful there. So I would say those teams are very likely to return. As far as newcomer locks, I've got two. I've got Notre Dame and Texas. I don't need to spend a whole hell of a lot of time on this. Just these teams barely missed the playoff last year. They went on deep runs a year ago. Notre Dame went to the national championship. Texas played eventual national champion Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl. Notre Dame has a much easier schedule, and I think Texas will have some challenges there too. But like, this is another year of Arch Manning. This is another year of CJ Carr. Yeah, you lose players to the NFL. Obviously, Jeremiah Love's off there. Texas loses a little bit, but not a whole hell of a lot. I think Texas is probably the most serious challenger to Georgia in the SEC. Although I would say Georgia's got the upper hand because Steve Sarkisian has not proven to be Kirby Smart yet. So, like, if the SEC is going to get two teams, then I feel it's going to be Georgia and Texas. If Notre Dame is probably poised to crash the college football playoff party, but let's be real, they know they got to win, go 11-1, be able to get Marcus Freeman back for another year is huge. Again, you are losing coaches. I think Mike Mickens and Al Washington are off to the NFL. I think one's going to the Ravens, one's going to the Giants as an assistant. So, like, maybe Dolphins. Again, I'm not can't recall that off the top of my head, but I look at Notre Dame and Texas as two teams that like I'd be surprised if they didn't make the playoff. So that's eight. All right, then we're gonna move down to our Power Four contenders. I have six. That would be Alabama, LSU, Michigan, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, and USC. I would say beyond the group of six winner and the eight that I have up there, those are probably the six teams vying for the final three spots in my early estimations. Well, granted, one of these six teams is going to be, I'm not going to say terrible next year, but it's going to be a massive disappointment. That's just kind of the nature of the beast here. Um, like right now, if I were to put three of those teams in, I would probably say leaning I'm going to go two SEC and then one Big Ten. I would probably lean LSU and Texas A&M getting in over Alabama and Oklahoma, and I'd probably lean USC over Michigan at this time, but a lot can change. And the reason why I have them as contenders is, look, I think Alabama is probably the weakest of those six right now. You lose Ty Simpson. You've got Austin Mack and Keelan Russell at quarterback. You got to figure out how to run the football, but you still recruit at a tremendously high level. You do lose Jamarcus Shepard, Nick Sheridan. You still have Brian Grubb on offense. You have Ken Womack and Maurice Linguist on defense. I think that this is a big year for Kalen DeBoer. You did win a playoff game. You did get your brains beat in by Indiana in the Rose Bowl, but that thing happens. LSU is like how I viewed about Ole Miss a year ago because it's Lane Kiffin. You get Sam Levitt to come over from Arizona State. That could be tremendous as well for the Tigers here. Um, but again, the LSU is probably of the 13 or 14 years we've had the playoff, they've been probably the most biggest disappointment, I would say. They've only made it one time, and that was the best team ever in 2019 when they finally put it all together. So I would say like LSU should have made the playoff a lot more than this. Maybe Lane Kiffin helps get them there, but I think it could be a challenging year for LSU. Like this is a team that could go 11-1 or 8-4. That's kind of where I'm at with them. And then Michigan, this is a very close one. I would say right now they're my first team out with USC getting in just because I think the schedule for Michigan's so hard. You got to play Oklahoma, granted at home. You also host Indiana at home, and then you got to play on the road at Oregon and Ohio State. Feels like you got to win at least two of those games. I don't think that 9-3 is going to get you in. Maybe some people think that they could, but where's your resume? And the only way you would get in at 9-3 is if all four of those teams make the playoff, which could certainly happen. Don't necessarily think Oklahoma's going to quite get there, but they're going to be like one of my first four out as well. And then I would also say like Kyle Whittingham is going to be an upgrade head coach over Sharon Moore. I think that kind of goes without saying. He's going to be an adult in the room. More importantly, he's never had resources like this at Utah. So I would say that this certainly boosts Michigan's chances. And Oklahoma, you have John Mateer back. You're able to retain Ben Arbuckle. Defensive staff's mostly intact. You have an identity now under Brent Venables. You didn't lose a whole hell of a lot to the NFL, but the big concern is like, did you recruit enough? Are you going to become multidimensional now as a team? And I think if Mateer takes a step up and is what'll be his final college football season, in all likelihood, yeah, I could see Oklahoma making the playoff for sure. But like, I did write about this for Storman and Norman with Dakota Gregory, on a little bit of PTO. Like, I think what is trying to think. There's an article for ESPN. I think Craig Howard, I think is his name, maybe wrote about this and did not have Oklahoma as one of his teams to make the playoff because of recruitment. He talked about the six teams that I said are locks, like that kind of emphasized this segment. Those are all in there, and he's also got a lot of the teams that I mentioned already here in this tier as well getting in. But I just kind of feel Michigan is very close. And then Texas A&M, you have Marcel Reed back. I think more importantly, Mike Elko is still there. You still recruit at a phenomenal level, both high school and in the transfer portal. I think also, losing Colin Klein to Kansas State, maybe that could be addition by subtraction for the Aggies. So I'm very high on A&M potentially making it back as well next year. And then USC, I think I has my last team, man. Again, I don't know the schedule like the back of their hand, but I know it's not going to be as difficult right now as Michigan's. I just know Michigan's is daunting. And I think USC with Jade Mailava coming in, they were able to hire Gary Patterson as defensive coordinator with Danton Lynn going to Penn State to link up with Matt Campbell. This is a team that I think could potentially put all in. Like, there's always a team every year where I'm like, like this is a team that like I usually fade, but like occasionally I'll be like, you know what, I'm gonna be all in on them because like either I'm right or they burn me. Yeah, I've done this with the Cowboys. I did this with the Ravens this past year. Um, it is what it is, but I am kind of bullish on USC this season. So that's what I got for those tiers. And then you got your power four pretenders. I've got eight. Auburn, BYU, Florida, Missouri, Ole Miss, Penn State, Tennessee, and Utah. These are all teams that have plus 10,000 odds to win the national championship, but I think there's some flaws with each. For the sake of time, I'll kind of just be a little more concise here. With Auburn, you may have a lot of money at your disposal if you're Alex Golish, but you're also bringing in a lot of South Florida players playing a very difficult schedule for Auburn. Like maybe the ceiling is 9-3. And if that's the ceiling, that's not good enough to make the playoff. You're also got to play on the road at Georgia and Alabama this year, and that's never good for the Tigers. BYU, I think putting them in a pretender category is a little mean. I think that they're probably a very formidable challenger to Texas Tech in the Big 12, but we saw them play the Red Raiders twice, and they just got squished like a grape. I do think Barrett Bachmeier takes a step forward. I think Kalani Sitake is probably the most underrated head coach in college football right now. If BYU makes the playoff next year, I'm not going to be surprised. I just don't see the Big 12 getting two teams in. And if they do, maybe they will get in. But Texas Tech is just, like I said, they're at basically locked territory now. Florida, I do think Florida will be better under John Summerall. I like the hiring of Buster Faulkner as your offensive coordinator coming over from Georgia Tech. You're bringing Aaron Philo with you to be your quarterback. You're also getting, I believe, Brad White to come over from Kentucky. So I think you kind of you upgrade the coaching department. I think your schedule's tough, but maybe Florida's more of a playoff team in 2 years. But I think the Gators will like the moves that the Gators have made this past year. As a Georgia fan and alum, I'm like, this doesn't make me feel good, which means it's probably good for the Gators. Missouri, this could be one of those really good Missouri years. I feel like we're kind of due for it. I think Austin Simmons coming over with a chip on his shoulder to be quarterback replacing Bo Pribula, I think. Eli Drinkwitz had his name thrown around a bunch throughout the coaching carousel. I think he's really good. I think we're kind of due for one of those Mizzou years. So if they have a softer schedule, they navigate it, or if they rattle off a few wins, I think that they could be good. Ole Miss, you have a lot of momentum off after this past year, but I think really the big thing is Pete Golding's not Lane Kiffin. And then, you don't have Trinidad Chambliss right now. I think Deuce Knight might be your quarterback, if I'm not mistaken. But either way, like Ole Miss might, they may not be a bowl team next year. This is a team of great intrigue. I feel like I've been pretty good on the pulse of Ole Miss, but the last couple of years. But again, this is a team that I kind of have a hard time getting a good feel of now. I do think that they will regress. Penn State, you know, I thought really highly of Iowa State in recent years, and you've got Iowa State in Happy Valley now with Matt Campbell bring everybody there. Love me some Rocco Becht. I think Sowell, their quarter or the receivers, fantastic as well. Chase Sowell, I think is his name. That sounds right. Either way, the Big Ten is probably only going to get four teams in, and I don't think Penn State's going to be on the same level as Michigan or USC this year. They'll be good, but like I don't see it right now. Then who else is on there? That's a pretender. Tennessee. I think Joey Aguilar is trying to play for an eighth year. Maybe that changes the game. I think it was a transitional year for Tennessee a year ago. Maybe if it really comes down to how good Jim Knowles' defense is. If his defense plays up to standard, then like that could be a huge difference. But that requires you beating Alabama, that requires you beating Florida and Vanderbilt. Those are all really tough games. So um, Tennessee's a team I'm keeping my eye on. I'm not going to say like they can't make the playoff, but I'm kind of dubious them probably not doing it. And then Utah, same sort of bucket there with BYU. Whoever wins Holy War is probably the most formidable challenger to Texas Tech in the Big 12. But at this time, also you're losing, at this time I don't see it. Also, you're losing Kyle Whittingham to Michigan. We love Morgan Scalley as his head coach. He's been groomed for this, but there's been a lot of people who've been groomed who can't handle it. So until I see him coach, I'm gonna fade Utah until I really know if Morgan Scalley is good. That's just how I am with that. And then teams that I think out of the group of six, because again, the Pac-12 is now in this era too. Um, there's six teams that I've been reading about that I think could do it. Yeah, Appalachian State, Boise State, Hawaii, Memphis, New Mexico, and UNLV. This is year two for Dowell Loggins there at App State. He did phenomenal things at South Carolina as their OC. I think App potentially moves forward. Boise State, again, I think they're going into the Pac-12, a down year this past year, relatively speaking. Spencer Danielson's a good head coach. I think you still got Maddox Madsen for another year. I think it could work out. Hawaii is really trending up under Timmy Chang, and I think you're still in the Mountain West. You could take advantage of that league too. Memphis, Charles Huff coming over from Southern Miss after only being there for 1 year. The year prior, he was at Marshall. So even though you lose Ryan Silverfield to Arkansas, Memphis might be one of the teams, might be the team to beat there in the American because remember North Texas was losing everybody to Oklahoma State and Tulane. Obviously, I think they made a horrible hire there with Will Hall and the John Summerall is going to Florida. New Mexico, Jason Eck's still there. I think that the Lobos are for real. It might come down to them and like Hawaii of who's going to win the Mountain West. And also UNLV is in the Mountain West too. Forgot about them. UNLV might be the favorite. I mean, they got some stuff going there. Dan Mullen's a fantastic head coach. Mountain West got some really good football this year. So I'm pretty quite bullish on all of that. So again, if I had to pick my college football playoff field right now, I'm gonna pull this up from my previous tab here. So right now, I would have Ohio State one, Georgia two, Miami three, Texas Tech four, Indiana five, Texas six, Notre Dame seven, Oregon eight, LSU nine, Texas A&M 10, USC 11. And I write this instant because I didn't really pick a group of 16. I'm probably gonna go with I'm gonna go with UNLV. I think that's a safe one to go with at this point, even though they never won it before. And yeah, moving over to our penultimate topic today, we're going to do some do Haas and do Hast. I wrote about this for Storman and Norman. Will Oklahoma's lack of off-season recruiting prowess will that impact their playoff chances? I'm going to go do Hast two S's, and that I don't think it will. But I will say though, if Oklahoma does not make the playoff, then I think people will point to this at Brent Venables and the staff's like, why could you have not done more? I think the reason that I was kind of shocked to not see Oklahoma be, in the likely returnees category is look, I thought this was an ascending team. I think this is a team that, played a very tough schedule, won a lot of close games, held their own versus tough opponents. Like they rose to the occasion. And I think that that's a cultural sort of thing that you could build upon. Not every team is like that. Some teams, beat teams that aren't very good on their schedule. But Oklahoma certainly they knew they had a daunting slate a year ago and they took advantage of that. And I think also they recruit defensive line very well. This is what Brent Venables' bread and butter is. You've got Mateer back for another season with Arbuckle as your play caller. You got to figure out a few more things as well. Like don't waste Jaden Zakat in your backfield. But I just kind of look at Oklahoma like I feel like they have enough players there where maybe recruiting is not as important as maybe it should have been for other teams. Like they don't have to make up a gap. Like they're kind of already there. Just to spend a few more minutes on this, like I'm kind of going through this with the SEC right now. And the SEC got five teams into the playoff a year ago. You had Georgia who won it. They beat Alabama in the SEC championship. And then Ole Miss, Oklahoma, and Texas A&M got in as at-large teams. Look, I think Texas is probably, along with Georgia, is probably the most likely teams to make it out of the SEC. And again, I've only got like four teams making it in, with LSU and Texas A&M. Texas A&M making it back, LSU being a newcomer. But if I had to add a fifth team, I think I'm more likely to put Oklahoma than Alabama right now. And, more so than Ole Miss or Tennessee or Mizzou, for sure. Vanderbilt as well. I'm trying to even think how far you get out. I guess like the bottom quarter of the SEC is like Arkansas, Kentucky, even though I love Will Stein, what he's doing, like Arkansas, Kentucky, South Carolina's got some room for improvement. And then, the last team down there, probably Mississippi State, although I think they're improving as well. Florida's got has room to grow too. But anyway, like I don't think if I had to do my first like four out, because I didn't do this on the previous show. First team out is Michigan. Second team out, I would have I think it's actually Oklahoma is my second team out. Third, I would say third's probably like Alabama, maybe. Maybe Alabama's a little bit further down. But yeah, like I've like the last three teams who are vying for that last spot would be, in my estimations, Michigan, USC, and Oklahoma. Those are all really close. And I think I gotta go back and forth on this. I just feel like the Big Ten's going to be well enough to get a fourth team in, and the SEC is not going to be quite there for a fifth team. But if it is, I mean, I'm not ruling out Oklahoma. I think that they're certainly trending up to a level of sustainability. Like this is the new standard. Make the playoff. Get back to the playoff. Win the playoff game for once in your life. They haven't done that to this point. Whether it was a four-team format, whether it's a 12-team format, whether they're playing the SEC or the Big 12, they just need to do it because they haven't done it yet. Yeah, I look at Oklahoma right now under Brent Venables as I think he kind of knows what he's doing. He recruited at a high level at Clemson, and maybe it's not the same in some ways. Like your recruiting battles are in some ways like more difficult. Like who you got to compete against. You look at Oklahoma right now, and like, man, I got to compete with Texas and A&M, LSU, Georgia. When you're at Clemson, it's like Florida State's up, Miami wasn't at that point. It's a different game. It's a different era. It's a different role too. But the more that I think about it, and the more that I kind of get my head around this, like it's Duhas two S's because I think the team's going to be fine without how strong they are at recruiting because I think they've done a good job of it already. But I will say though, if it doesn't work out, this is a very easy way to point the finger at it with blame. And let's get out of here with our last topic here. This or that. This is going to be a lot of fun. This is going to be something that I think Cody and I can do, and I really wish he would have been on here. And this is kind of based off of those playoffs and kidding me tears that I did. I'm going to take 12 teams from that list and then have six pairs and say who is more likely to do what and explain that. So let's start with this. Our first pair. Which team is more likely to get a one seed? Georgia or Ohio State? A year ago, Georgia won the SEC and they got the three seed. Ohio State finished runner-up in the Big Ten to Indiana and they got the two seed. And right now, I would say this is probably my national championship projections. I would probably lean Ohio State over Georgia right now. Bias, just to be bias, but maybe I'll come around it at some point. But I I think these are probably the two best teams in the country. It's the answer here, most likely to get the number one seed is Ohio State, and it's for this reason. We saw what happened a year ago. They lost the Big Ten championship and they still got the two. Georgia won the SEC and they didn't get the two. I think it just shows that the Big Ten's won three national championships in a row. They are on top of the college football world. I think Ohio State plays a little bit tougher conference schedule than Georgia will this year. And unless Georgia has like goes 12 and 0 and Ohio State's 11 and 1, like all things equal, if they have the same record and they're both like what 11 and 1 conference champions, they're going to give it to Ohio State. And that's okay. But like that's the reality and I accept that for what it is. The next one, which team is more likely to play a next year's national championship game again? Indiana or Miami? Look, I don't think either of them are playing for national championship this year. And I'll say this, the previous playoffs you've had, the two teams who have played for a national championship, it is more likely than not that at least one of them, I say that right, at least one of them will miss the playoff next year. It's not always the case. I think it's something like 1.1 teams who play a national championship miss it the following year. And even though I have Indiana and Miami as like likely returnees in that law category, I don't think Indiana is going to win the Big Ten next year. I think Miami is going to win the SEC or win the ACC. And I think that Miami could also throw up all over itself. That's totally within the realm of possibility. That wouldn't shock me. Indiana could never lose the game for the rest of time. Who knows? But I would say that like the pathway in terms of just like overall likelihood of them winning their respective league and getting in as, an AQ, if you will, I'd probably leave Miami there. It's not by much. And I also kind of think that like Miami had gained a lot by being road warriors, whereas I think Indiana kind of went to learn how to be the hunted. And I think that's a different sort of mental makeup. I think that look, every team is different, but I think Miami's lessons to be learned could translate a little bit more. So if Miami's playing for a national championship next year, I would be less surprised at that happening than Indiana getting back. All right, the third pair. Which team is more likely to take that next step in 2026? Oregon or Texas Tech? And I think this is all about defining what the next step is. For Oregon, is that like getting back to a national championship? Is that winning a national championship game? For Texas Tech, is it making the playoff again? Is it actually winning a playoff game? And I think the more likely team to do that is Texas Tech because the step that they have to take is further down on the rung of the ladder and it's more obvious. It's like just win a playoff game. Whereas Oregon's like, okay, we got to win like a national title or we got to get back to a national title. And even that requires multiple wins. Look, Oregon has played in two national championships, in my lifetime. They've made the playoff three times. They've got the number one seed and got blown out. Then they've also been a five seed. They've won a home playoff game. Then they won a quarterfinal over Texas Tech. So I would say it's just the next step is I'm not saying that Texas Tech is going to skip steps, if you will, but it feels like it's more likely to happen because I don't know who's going to really challenge them as much in the Big 12. Whereas Oregon, like, even though I think they're really good, I'm not picking them to win the Big 10. Maybe Ohio State beats them in Indianapolis. That's kind of probably where I'm leaning at this time, but we'll see. So yeah, I just think that the next step is a little more defined with Texas Tech and a little bit easier. All right, three down, three more to go. Which team is more likely to win the college football playoff next year? Notre Dame or Texas? Look, I don't think either of them will. Maybe I'll come around on it, but if I had to pick one, I would probably go Texas. And here's why. This is actually probably the easiest of these six pairings for me to kind of get there with. Look, Texas is going to play a much tougher schedule. They're going to have to play a conference championship game. Notre Dame is not. And I think what I've seen is when teams are not battle tested as much throughout the playoff or the season into the playoff, that shows up in a big way in the negative. And I think with Notre Dame, that could be problematic. I think with Texas, I think you still got to play Ohio State. You win that game. I think that one's in DKR, if I'm not mistaken. But let's say, you're finally able to beat the big bad bully Georgia in Atlanta. Like that'll be cathartic. Maybe, I'm not saying like you're gonna like run out of gas and keel over and die next after that, but You win that game, that's even more momentum. That's even more, that adds to the like you can get to another gear, like mentally. And I think that might be key there a little bit as well. You're also bringing Will Muschamp on your defensive staff over Kukowski, whereas I think their name's lost a little bit to the NFL in recent years. So could they both play? Could they play each other for national championship? It wouldn't shock me, but I would say I think Texas is more likely to win the national championship of those two. All right, second to last one, more likely to make the playoff, Michigan or USC. And again, this one's pretty easy too. And I've gone with USC. And the reason is just I think Michigan's schedule is brutal. Even though I think that they both have tremendously talented quarterbacks in Bryce Underwood and Jade Mayava, I think there's just been a little bit more stability, for lack of a better word, with USC. Lincoln Riley's been there for a while. I'm not a Lincoln Riley fan at all, but he is showing a willingness to get a good defensive coordinator. Moving on from Alex Grinch was the best thing he ever did for him because it allowed him to get Danton Lynn. And then now it allowed him to get Gary Patterson, a guy that he competed with and has a lot of trust and respect for from their days in the Big 12 when he was at Oklahoma and Patterson was at TCU. So again, I think USC's schedule is a little bit more navigable. In a way, I think Mayava's a little bit more seasoned as a quarterback. And I think in a way, I mean, he could win the Heisman Trophy. It wouldn't shock me. Underwood, I'm a little bit more dubious of that, but maybe in year three he does this. But I would go USC here. And then finally, our last one of the day, more likely to miss the playoff, Alabama or Texas A&M. I think it's Alabama because you still have Marcel Reed at quarterback for A&M. You got to usher in a new quarterback there for Alabama for the next year in a row because Ty Simpson was only a 1 year starter. You do lose some coordinators on both sides. Obviously, Colin Klein leaves Texas A&M to take over his alma mater of Kansas State. Jamarcus Shepard's now taking over at Oregon State. I think Nick Sheridan's going to be the offensive coordinator for Pat Fitzgerald at Michigan State. So that's interesting. Um, Schedules are probably both going to be very challenging. If you go win 10 games with those schedules, you're probably going to make the playoff. But I would say the biggest thing for Alabama for me here, and even though you do host, even though I think I think you host Georgia, maybe, and then you host Auburn as well. So maybe that moves you forward. The single biggest thing is I just think Mike Elko is a little bit better of a head coach or a little bit steadier than Kalen DeBoer is right now. I think Elko knows exactly who he is and what he's trying to do at A&M, whereas DeBoer is just kind of like he's won a lot of games, but like the first 2 years for him, it's been, kind of a thankless job. And honestly, like when you take over to Alabama, it shouldn't be a thankless job. Like it should be one of the best jobs ever. It just is, it's a very tough entry point for him. He's making it the best of his ability. And again, like if and when it fails for him in Tuscaloosa, that's not the end of the line for him. He's going to find another job. And he's going to do some damn good things here because Kalen DeBoer is a fantastic coach. Just situation stuff, but I think this is going to make him an outstanding coach. Maybe this year, maybe even further. I still think the world of Kalen DeBoer, but Mike Elko is my guy. And this was episode 249 of False Start. You can follow me, John Buhler, on Twitter or the X at Buhler118. You can follow my absent-minded, absent colleague, Cody Williams, at the Sizzle20. You can follow the show at CFB False Start. Like, rate, listen, subscribe, review on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere there's podcasts. Give us a 5-star review. Really helps the show grow. Again, Cody will be back at some point. He may have the flu or fever or something like that. The he got frisky in Frisco. This is what happens. But obviously the Super Bowl is tonight. I'm recording this Sunday afternoon. I am going to take Seattle. I could look completely wrong before the season comes live because that's how it goes. But warm days are ahead of us. Spring ball is right around the corner. Once again, thanks for listening. And this is False Start.